Hi, everyone, and welcome to the latest Career Talk. We have Adam Broda, who is a career coach and the founder of Broda Coaching. So, welcome, Adam, back to the show.
Hi, Andrew. It's good to be back. I'm not in a garage in my in-laws' basement anymore, so happy to do in round two.
Yeah, and obviously you're in a beautiful space right now, but yeah, no, thank you so much for taking the time out to share your wisdom again. And people may remember you from being on the show from earlier, but yeah, we're going to be talking all about career transitions. And like I said, as we're talking, get your questions in because we'll be answering those in just a bit. Now, Adam, I'm gonna obviously take priority here with my questions, and then we'll get to our members in a bit. But can you tell us really what's the first thing you recommend people do when they say, "Hey, I want to change careers or do a transition in my job?"
Yeah, this is the best question to start out with, and I'm just going to start by saying that I run into so many people, both in the coaching world, but also in the full-time professional world, that miss this aspect, right? It's, I just got laid off, or I don't like my boss, or there's a bazillion reasons why they want to change, and the priority just becomes change jobs. I think for so many people, you need to get to the why are you changing, right? The successful career transition is going to hit on a number of levels, but the why behind the change is probably the biggest. So doing that is hard, right? Assessing, am I looking for satisfaction? Am I looking for flexibility? Am I looking for purpose or identity or fill in the blank? Getting to that level is difficult. So we use a tool called a life wheel. Um, for folks that are familiar with life wheels, it's a way to assess different aspects of your life kind of introspectively. We use a pretty advanced one with a lot of different categories, but what we'll have people do is say, okay, can you numerically or quantifiably score on a scale of 1 to 10 different aspects of your life in the current state, right? Current job, current boss, current work complications. Let's try to get a number behind what that looks like, right? And then from there, once we've scored those categories, we can start to ask questions around, what are the things on this wheel that you'd want a career transition to impact, right? Whether for, the better or for the worse. I don't think you're going to be perfect tens across the board. And we talk about that. But maybe the reason why you want to change is more time with your kids. Maybe it's compensation, right? And you just don't feel like you're being treated fairly. All of those things need to be up front and on the table when considering a career transition, because a successful change is going to address those gaps or those issues. So life wheel is where we begin, and then again, once we kind of have that information, we begin the process of designing a career really to fit the lifestyle that you want first. The job is just a function of the lifestyle, right? We work to live, and that's a big part of our coaching philosophy. So we start by looking at that lifestyle component at the very beginning.
Yeah, I think that's really fantastic. And also, what I like about the life wheel is that it meets you where you are. So, a 10 for someone on the life wheel could be someone's 7 or someone's 12 or something like that. So
Exactly.
you get to sort of determine, oh, when it comes to stress in my job or how much you want to be challenged by work, you can gauge for yourself. Don't compare to someone else or don't use someone else's sort of threshold for your life wheel because otherwise that's going to set you up for failure and not really lead you to the best outcome. So I always tell people when they're using a life wheel or a scale like that to make sure that you're using it toward your threshold and not someone else's. So that's always my suggestion with life wheels, and it's one of the reasons that I like them. And do you use one yourself, Adam?
Yeah, most of the stuff we use is just because I've experimented with it in some form or fashion. I can tell you that the very first time I used it was six or 7 years ago when I was transitioning into a management job at another company, and I went through the assessment and just thought like, wow, I really do a lot of stuff bad. Maybe I should think about how to use this going forward to reflect more often and try to improve other aspects of my life. But yeah, absolutely, it's a tool I use personally and have for some time.
Yeah, and also I think also something to probably tell people is that you could remove and add spokes to that wheel depending
Mm,
on what's important to you, right?
absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah,
I would
and
say
I
that
I think that's a big thing.
most of the people that we work with, no two wheels are the same. And I think that's the other really good call out you made, right? Is that it all comes back to what you want. Some people want to be billionaires. Some people just want to work their 40 hours and go home. And some people want to not work at all. And that's going to drastically affect what a successful wheel looks like. It's the cool part is you get to define that for yourself.
Definitely, yeah. And, yeah, I know a lot of people wanna be billionaires, but a lot of other people hopefully
Some
let's settle
don't.
for millions. Yeah, yeah, millions. Millions is good. But yeah, and before we continue, I just wanna say hi to a few more people who joined our stream. We have Jeremy from North Carolina, we have Stephen from Scotland, we have Levi from Kentucky, Stephanie from Virginia, Mark from Texas, Dipti from Canada, we have Tanya from Chicago, Jennifer from Nigeria, and Stacy from Wisconsin. So welcome to all of you. And also, you're going to be seeing some slides that Adam is using. And if you miss anything, don't worry. This broadcast is being recorded, so you could just come back and watch it again if you want to take a longer look at any of the graphics that you're seeing. So stick around, and also don't forget to get your questions in. Adam, my next question for you is sort of, when you are helping people transition into a new career or a new field, what is a high level sort of transition look like? Like, what should people expect?
Right. So like we talked about, right? The first place we'll go is the why, right? And we'll use the life wheel. We'll talk about what kind of things in your life do you want this career change to impact. Once we have a good understanding of the lifestyle component, it's time to start framing, you know, what a successful career side looks like. Typically, where we go is something we call the four pillars, and there's no slide needed for these. It's just four different areas of career. So we'll work with our clients to define what they're passionate about, what motivates them, what gets them excited, why do they get out of bed in the morning, right? What are the things that they want to do and spend time on? The second one is just strengths. What are they really good at? Sometimes that comes back to, it's easier to work on something you're good at. It's easier to promote and have better opportunities when you're doing work that you're good at. It's also just more enjoyable. So strengths is another component we focus in on. Work environment is another complicated one, but also really important, right? Where do you want to work? How do you want to work? Do you want to work in a big company, a small company? Do you want lots of diversity? Is that important to you, right? Do you want opportunities for promotion? Do you not care about that? Environment could also just be, do you want to work from home or your car or the beach? Um, but yeah, we define the parameters for what a successful environment would look like. And then the last one, obviously not the most important thing, but a big factor is just compensation, right? How do you want to be compensated? Once we've got parameters on those four things, we can kind of reflect, right, and say, okay, what does our current career state look like? How close to these four factors are we in terms of skills and experiences and the work type that we're doing? Um, Once we've assessed the current state, it's time to start trying to populate the desired end state. So again, we'll use some tools. Sometimes it's just simple career mapping. We'll ask people what their 5-year plan might be or 3-year plan might be, but we try to start to get an idea of the kinds of jobs or companies where people could accomplish the type of work that fits into that passion, strengths, environments, and compensation space. So again, kind of working from that current state to that desired end state. And then really the nuts and bolts of the process is just getting into the weeds on researching the types of job roles or the types of companies, the types of work opportunities that are going to try and create the best overlap between the current state you exist in with all of the skills and experiences and value you currently have, and then where you want to go, right? We try to identify the gaps. There could be skill-based gaps, experience-based gaps. There could be environment or compensation gaps, but we try to identify all that in the process. But it's really going from point A to point B, picking out what's working already versus what do we need to work on, and what kind of time frame is it going to take to address that.
Yeah. And I think there are so many people out there, and during the pandemic, obviously, there was what we called the great reshuffle because people were moving around so much. But, those were a lot of people who said, hey, listen, I want to try something new. I want to do something. And then I think we had like the second wave of it where you had people who sort of saw other people who successfully navigated a career
Right.
change
Right.
and then said, I want to do that too. The issue is that sometimes people don't have clarity about what they want to do, and they need to get from that ideation of, I just don't want to do this anymore, or I want to go and I want to help people more directly, or something like that. So, once you have that bug in your system, obviously the devil's in the details. So, how do you say, okay, I want to do a career change, I want to transition into a new field? How do you set up an initial target? Because I think that's probably one of the most difficult steps for people, right?
Yeah, it is. And it's where a lot of the work happens on the initial side, in terms of job searching. To get real specific, I would say the first thing we're going to recommend people do, and this of course might depend on the industry or the type of role they're looking at, but it's to identify people that have the jobs they think they want and go talk to them. um, as simple as that sounds, I would say that that is the most effective thing I think our client base has done in the past 2 years that we've been, career coaching. But it's talk to people that have the roles and the responsibilities that you think you'd be interested in. You're going to learn a ton from those networking conversations, and you'll be able to scope down or narrow down kind of your short list, right? um, I would say we start with a big giant list of possible companies, possible job roles. There might be 20 different things on that list to begin with, and we'll work with clients to kind of throw those out there and brainstorm and populate. We'll put that research plan to learn more about what those roles mean and the compensation that comes with them, the environments that you might be working in. Again, kind of back to that 4 criteria that we talked about. But the objective, again, to be specific, is we try to get clients to narrow their search down to somewhere between 3 to 5 ideal companies and then 1 to 3 job roles. And the reason why we try to get so specific is because that's going to make the churn on the application side and the networking side and the content creation side so much easier, right? It's very difficult to be marketable to 100 companies and 100 potential roles. It's not as difficult to be marketable to two, right? Um, so the process of trying to put yourself out there, which is the next part of the job seeking phase, becomes a heck of a lot easier when you've got kind of your niche network figured out. If that makes sense.
Totally. And yeah, and I think, narrowing things down sometimes feels a bit um, like the opposite of what you should be doing in a job search, because so many job seekers say, listen, I want to be employable to everyone. The issue with that is that, there are a lot of jack of all trades out there. So your value decreases. But if you can narrow things down and say, listen, I'm focusing on only these companies, then you could put your energy to them. You also don't feel like you're drowning when there are like 100 or 150 companies that you could be applying to, and you sort of say, oh my god, where do I go next? So the same works for both ways. You are more marketable when you have sort of a niche, or you have more of a specialization. And then at the same time, your job search tends to be a little bit more successful when you can narrow down and say, okay, what are these employers and companies specific issues that I can help solve?
Right.
And, if you have those 4 or 5, that's much more manageable than saying, I want to be employable to 100 or 20 people. So that's always my recommendation too. Is sort of like, don't sort of look out into the sea and think you're going to, get a bite by any fish. You want to sort of focus and stalk sort of who you want to actually hire you. So I think that's great advice. The issue though, I think, is a lot of times people don't even know really what they want to do, or they don't know what roles are available to them. So what is your advice for people who say, listen, I don't know what role to go into, and I sometimes don't even know what field I want to go into, but I want to change? What's your suggestion in finding something new?
Yeah, excellent question. And again, kind of a rubber meets the road situation. I would start by saying, number one, I'm not a person that believes in absolutes in this space, right? We have recommendations, we have tools and mechanisms you can use, but um, there's a lot of different potential ways to find the next career. The way we start is we're big on advocating for building strength on strength, right? And we do that because every again, kind of think of it like a business or a hiring manager would, right? Is that I'm trying to hire somebody that's going to create return on investment. That's how I keep my business alive. um, from a value proposition perspective, as a job seeker, right, you're going to be the most valuable to a person, that's got a problem that lines up with something you're good at. So the strength on strength model is typically where we encourage people to begin, right? And we use something called a SWOT analysis. which again, I'm sure multiple people have heard of, to try and help us identify what those strengths are. You don't need to be good at everything, right? We want to double down on the maybe, let's just say again, 3 to 5 skills or experiences that you're really good at and you've done a lot in the past and you have a history of high level performance. We're going to leverage those top tier transferable skills in the way that we market and brand and share value and results. Because again, as a hiring manager, and I can say this because I am one, uh, that's what I'm looking for from from competitive candidates or applicants is I want to know, tell me about the value you've created at past companies, right? Tell me about the results you delivered. How did you measure your success? Um, if you can answer those questions in a way that sells stuff that you're really good at, again, we're hitting back on those 4 criteria, right? It's finding work that you're going to excel at, but it's also doing it in a way that makes you the most valuable. So SWOT analysis helps us kind of go around the wheel and say, okay, I'm good at these things. These are things I may be weak or I have opportunities to improve in. The threats one is an interesting call out, but typically the way I ask that is, if you're in an interview room interviewing for your target job and there's 5 other people sitting outside in the hallway, right? What do you think that they have that you don't? That's kind of how we address the threats one. But we assess all that stuff, but really just comes back to trying to find the right combination of strengths and experiences to sell to your target audience.
Got it. And can we actually, while we have that slide up, can you go around and sort of give us an example of each one, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. So if I was working with, let's just say, a client that was interested in program management, right, and they were a project manager, and they're trying to figure out how to identify the right kinds of strengths to get into that target job, we would start by saying, ignore the target job, right? Tell me about what your strengths are right now. So we go through and say, hey, I've got a lot of experience running complicated projects with lots of stakeholders, right? I've done that hundreds of times in my last 5 years. Let's put that on the strengths list. As far as weaknesses, we would go and take a look at job requests or job descriptions of some of those target program management positions they're interested in and say, okay, what do you not have on these lists, right? What do you think that is a common theme that you might not have? We try to identify something like, managing a budget, right? And that might be a weakness. Opportunities, in some respects, is pretty similar to weaknesses, right? It might be something that you've got a little bit of experience doing, but maybe not enough to meet those basic or preferred qualifications. Again, this could be something like leading a team, whether directly or indirectly. The program management job might require that. You don't have it, but you've had lots of mentors or mentees, or you've done other similar types of work. And then the threats one, like I mentioned, is we try not to be too negative with that. It's more about an introspective question of, what do you think your competition has that makes them a fit for that program management job that you don't have, right? What keeps you up at night? What's kind of bothering you in the back of your head? And the answer to that question could be all kinds of things. In many cases, it's just competence, strangely, is the most popular answer that we get. But yeah, that's what could fit in potentially each of those boxes. And we use that information to help us as we move to the next phase, which is, again, that branding and narrowing down and identifying the firms and the roles.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for that walkthrough. And people will go through that and they'll sort of come up with maybe a few things that they're interested in, or sometimes a lot. And what would you say is sort of the next step? How do you organize all those various interests where you say, listen, I don't actually really know. I'm still stuck between a lot of these things. So how do you really dig into them and find, okay, that's the thing I want to do?
Yeah. Again, another caveat here is that I mean, we've had candidates, or not candidates, we've had clients that we've worked with that will literally change the thing that they want to do, a couple weeks into the process of working with them. So your interests change, your life situations change, what you want changes. And I just want to say, hear it from me, and I'm sure you'll hear it from Andrew and others, but like, that is okay, right? Changing the quote unquote dream job happens all the time. Um, as long as you're aware of the changes and you can keep coming back to that life wheel model of like, what do I actually want? You're going to be just fine. Um, but yeah, in a nutshell, we start with, again, a big, broad, generally vague list of skills. Um, Typically, what we do with clients is we'll just ask them straight up, right? Like, off the top of your head, with no research, tell me some of the things you're interested in, right? Give me 5 skills. We'll start with those. We'll give them kind of a research window. This is really where the coaching kind of comes into the process of we'll make recommendations based off what we know about the market and them and possible job opportunities. But we try to get somewhere between 15 to 20 potential job skills or job titles. Once we do that, we would just call that a job shortlist. We'll do research about the day-to-day work. We'll talk to people. It's a big one. Remember, we'll learn about job flexibility in those roles. We'll try to get a good understanding of compensation and what the kind of problems you're solving. And this is where leveling also comes into play, right? Like a senior level project manager versus a principal level or a director level. What changes when you change levels? Um, that's where we'll get a lot of that research into our shortlist as well. And then we'll work to map all of that information into what we call a fringe map. And you can really just think of this as bucketizing the information you've researched. So to help us understand, where we're most likely to have success from a transition perspective, and really what we mean by that is just getting the job, right? Not the 4 pillars and not the life wheel and not the lifestyle component, but just making that job change. That's where we're going to start ranking from simple to moderate to complex. So again, I'll go back to my example of you're a project manager, you're interested in program management, you think, right? That's one of your skills. As you think about what it's going to take to transition, we'll help you identify, is that a complicated transition? Is it multiple steps to get there? Do you need education? Do you need mentorship? Do you need new experiences outside of your day-to-day job that we have to go create in order to make that transition happen? That's where we kind of get into the minutia of understanding the complexity. But yeah, we take that 15 to 20 skills list, we try to drop that into 3 separate buckets based on the likelihood, or maybe let's just say the path of least resistance. Your ideal job could be in any of those. And our job as transition coaches is to come in and try to help you build the plan to get there. But it's all about understanding, again, where you're most likely to have success, where you've got gaps, where you're going to meet most requirements, where you're not going to meet most requirements. So it's a lot of research, a lot of time. This is maybe the most time intensive or homework intensive part of the transition process, is figured out the complexity in each of those target skills. And again, once we've got that fairly well mapped out, it's a lot easier to do that narrowing down process that we talked about.
And then how do you get that short list then? So do you how do you, if you have a job that maybe is really appealing to you in the complex uh, part of that graphic, and then all of a sudden you have maybe something that is interesting but not that really exciting to you in the simple path, how do you figure out what is going on your short list and what isn't?
Yeah. Um, Another complicated question, I think we could keep pretty high level, but the model we use, once you've got your 15 to 20, potential job roles. Um, let's say you've narrowed down to some list of companies. It could be 10, it could be 20. But what we're essentially going to push you to do is to try and take the bucket of potential roles that we just showed on screen, right? And then do the same thing with companies. So your shortlist is essentially going to be organized into 3 tiers of companies. We would call this dream companies, ideal companies, and then plan B. Dream is going to be, you know, these are the jobs I absolutely want, the top of the list. Ideal would be I'm satisfied with these. They meet the 4 criteria, and I think I'd be happy in these roles. They're maybe not the top of my list, but they're good enough. And then plan B is more, I'd say the way we describe that option is if a meteor hit the planet Earth, right, and I had to get a job tomorrow in a desperate situation, like where do I know I could go quick? So we try to map out some of that information, but a shortlist is going to be opportunities organized into tiers of companies, dream, ideal, and plan B. Opportunities organized into tiers of job roles, uh, same kind of a scenario. So typically, what we're looking for is a matrix of 3 to 5 firms organized into those categories, 1 to 3 job roles organized into, again, those categories. Um, we've now mapped those roles to that complexity matrix. And what we can do is say, okay, your ideal company is Spotify, right? And you want to be a product manager. Let's say that's the top of your matrix, right? Dream company, dream job role. Let's get a rough level plan in place to figure out how complicated it's going to be to get there. And then we'll kind of work our way down the list to do that same level of understanding with, the lowest rated company with the lowest rated job. And then we'll have a really open, honest conversation with our client at that point, or whoever we're working with, about how much work do you want to put in, or how much complexity are you willing to entertain, right? Do you want a job that you can go get in 3 weeks, versus are you willing to, go get some education, or go get a certification, or go do a boot camp, or whatever it is to make yourself more marketable for that top level thing. So it all comes back to what the client wants, or what the job seeker wants. We try to do our best to lay out all those options, but yeah, shortlist again is going to be 3 to 5 companies ordered by preference, 1 to 3 job roles ordered by preference, and then some research driven understanding of how complicated it's going to be to transition into those jobs, which again is what a lot of we're going to be doing is.
Yeah, and I assume there's a lot of that previous work that comes into play at the end too, because you can sort of look at that short list, and even though something sounds really cool as a job or a career, it may not actually align with what that person said was important to them. So you could sort of bring back that wheel, you could bring back those pillars and say, okay, well, are these still important to you? And that might sort of help sort of make sure that they're going in the right direction, right?
That's absolutely, and I would, I mean, just a practical example, right? But the job role of program manager, in my humble opinion, is one of the most abused in all of the tech industry. I mean, Lord knows what a program manager could be at a specific firm. So we'll work with clients that, will want to transition into program management, but what that job requires, or what it is at company A versus company B, could be totally different, right? And the more they talk to people in the industry, or the more they network, or the more they do research, it might weed itself out, right? Because this one company doesn't entertain program management in that way, and it doesn't compensate in the same way, and you don't have the same job responsibilities. But you won't know unless you do the research. So again, it's important to kind of do the fact finding.
Yeah, and I know it's off topic, but I do adore program managers because they make things run efficiently when they're
Yeah,
given the ability to do so. So, big shout out to all program managers out there.
yeah, I've been one myself for many years. So I live in the space, or I lived in the space for some time, but absolutely couldn't do the work without them. But I don't always know what it is that they do.
Yeah. And I want to make sure that we get to member questions, and we're going to get into more of the nuts and bolts of actually making that switch to a new career. But before we go to that, I just have one last question, Adam. And really, it comes down to a fear that I think a lot keeps a lot of people from transitioning into a new field or a new job. And that is buyer's remorse. A lot of people might say, okay, listen, I'm afraid that I might go through all of this and end up in a place that I don't want. And the grass always looks greener from the other side. But what if it's not? So what do you tell people
Yeah.
who say, listen, I want something different, but I just don't want to get over there and figure out, hey, actually, I was probably better off at the in the old role or the old function.
Yeah, another great question, and to be honest, this one might be more common than most of the others that we talked about, right? Is, what do I do if I get there and it's not what I thought? Um, I'd say number one, it's okay, and you're okay. Uh, Again, there's just so many things that can change in the business world, in the corporate world, and then of course on your side, right, with personal interests and what your life looks like. And I can speak personally, right, from 2019 Adam with no kids was a completely different employee than 2022 Adam with 2 kids. So yeah, stuff changes, and it's okay to want different things, even in short periods of time. um, I would say, if you find yourself in that scenario, what I typically recommend is, depending on how long you've been in the role, you might pursue different options, right? If you get there and it's a highly toxic work environment, and you immediately recognize it's not for you, you've been conned, right? Whatever the scenario is, but I'd say number one, never jeopardize your mental health, right? If you can help it. If there's a legitimate reason that you need to leave, or it's not a healthy place for you to work, not good for you, health wise, in a number of perspectives, I would say don't worry about the number, the amount of time that you spent there, whether it's weeks or months or years. Find the next best option to move on. And maybe that's just from a manager, right? Maybe it doesn't need to be a change from, the entire company or the entire business, but you can figure out, again, following the process we just kind of went through, like, what are the things I am looking to impact from another career transition, right? How big does that transition need to be? I'd say that the process we walked through in a nutshell can apply to, somebody that's just made a poor career choice. Um, you can run that process again, of course, editing it this time for maybe some lessons learned from the last time you went through where you landed in a spot that wasn't ideal, right? What did you do wrong? Maybe there's a way to adapt the process. The process, of course, is not perfect, so learn on the fly, iterate. Um, but yeah, if it's a bad environment, it's putting you at jeopardy, not good for your health in whatever sense. I'd say start the process over. If you've been there for a short amount of time, and let's just say like a couple weeks or months, uh, and it's not a scenario where you feel, let's just say, like it's impacting your health, I would say stick it out. That might not be the most popular answer, but I really would encourage people, try to get to that 6 month to 1 year mark, even if it's a job you're not overtly passionate about or overly excited about. Try your best to find ways to make it into that. Right. Try to find ways to exceed expectations in what you're doing and network inside the company and meet amazing people. If you're not 100% in love with your job and it doesn't, require any more than 40 hours a week, take some extra time to figure out what's going on outside of that role or outside of that small team, and learn the company. Um, I think a lot of people sometimes, to your point, Andrew, right? Like, they'll go through a bad career transition and find themselves in a place that's less than ideal, and then kind of hit the panic button, right, and walk away in a couple months. Um, I'd say again, effective job seekers, even if that happens to them, you can job search while still working, right? If it's not hurting you or hurting your mental health or, putting you in a negative scenario to stay employed, I'd say, learn the company and try to find a better option internally. If that's not working out, begin the job seeking process while you're still working there. It removes a lot of the pressure and the stress of having to do it while unemployed. Um, so probably, at a high level, that's the few options I'd start with. Of course, there's a bazillion different scenarios for what could be going on inside a career transition. So I'm always going to throw that disclaimer out there, right? Go talk to people. If you felt like you found a bad spot or you went through a poor transition or the process broke and it didn't work, um, go get some other opinions. Go have some conversations with friends or family. Reach out to other people in the industry. Reach out to other people on LinkedIn. Talk to skip level managers. If you're not happy, you don't really have a lot to lose, right? So um, don't feel hesitant to exercise some of those options and get as much information as you can before making another decision to leave or to move on.
Yeah, totally. I would second that. And also, I think a lot of people underestimate how much their identity is tied to their previous employers or previous roles. And a lot of times, when you are ending up, going somewhere different, there's excitement around hiring and things like that. And then you get into the role and you're like, oh, this is different. And there's just always going to be an initial sort of weird feeling that you get that's almost going to seem like sadness or a loss, and it's going to take some time to get over that, even if it's this amazing job and opportunity. So make sure you give your space, your time, yourself space to make sure that you can process those emotions, because it may not be the job, it may not be the opportunity. You may eventually actually really like your job. It's just something different. And we're sort of intrinsically programmed to
Mm.
say, ooh, change. I could avoid all those feelings if I just don't change. So that's what I
Yeah,
always recommend when people start a new job. I'm like, you're going to feel sort of weird after things settle down, and they're always like, ah, no. And then they come back and they go, actually, I did sort of feel like I lost a piece of myself, but then they find it
absolutely. Yeah,
again.
it's a good call out, right? Is you really, and I can't tell someone like what the right answer is for them, right? If you
Yeah. Yeah.
want
Yeah. Yeah.
to go in guns blazing and make Google part of who you think you are, and that makes you happy, then by all means, right? Go for it. I'm not going to apply that model to myself. I think it's a dangerous game to make, your corporate title a part of your personal identity. But I've had people that want that, right? I mean, like that's what
Yeah.
they're here
Yeah.
for, and go for it.
Yeah, and now we have so many great questions in here, and I want to start with one from Kaditra, who says, "How do you state a career transition in a resume?" And I think this is a big stumbling block for people because they sort of say, "Listen, I'm doing something different," how do my past experiences align with what I want to do now?
Yeah. So the question, how do I state a career transition in a resume? So I'm going to take that from a perspective of you're using a resume in the process of career transitioning, right? So hiring managers looking at it and saying, hey, you're applying to a job with a different title. You haven't done this work in the past. Um, Great question. One that comes up all the time. I would say it's that build strength on strength principle and leverage transferable experiences. So prior to ever getting to the point where there's a hiring manager looking at your resume, I would say you're going to know that job description that they're hiring for. You're going to know the things on the qualifications list or the experiences list that you can do and have done. And that's exactly how I'd answer that question, right? I would even use myself as an example of that. I transitioned from a senior engineering manager at an aerospace company to a senior program manager in a tech company, completely different spaces, but justified my reasons to be there based off of like, hey, I've done all the stuff on your qualifications list, right? I've run businesses, I've built buildings, I've hired people, I've led projects and solved problems in these very similar ways. The industries are different, but I have the skills you're looking for, right? And they're right on your job description. By the way, here's a bunch of results that I delivered when I did these things. That's exactly how I would frame up the resume, right? Is have them speak to those qualifications that are transferable, that you've done, and you've got experience doing.
Yeah, and also if you're only, like you said, targeting 3 to 5 companies, then it makes it a lot easier to target
Right.
each of those resumes to those companies. That way you're not just sort of doing one general one and hoping for the best.
Right.
Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah, because you can go the
and
opposite way, right? I've had that problem too of applying to something that I don't meet enough of the qualifications for.
definitely. And we have a question here that goes back to something else you mentioned, and this one's from D. And D wants to know, how do you start a conversation with those already in the role? So when you're sort of exploring, trying to figure out what a role would be like, how do you sort of start that conversation with maybe a stranger, and just doing a cold email or a cold in-mail to say, hey, can you tell me about this?
Yeah, this is a fully loaded question that I think we could spend a lot of time talking about, and part of our networking strategy that we build for clients that work with us. Simple terms. Try to find people that are gonna have valuable information for you that are closer and closer to that, let's just call it relationship cloud, right? Like if you don't have to go to strangers, don't, right? Do your research. Do you have family members? Do you have friends? Do you have past work connections? Do you have alumni connections? Use the network that you already have to start that process. It might not have to be a total stranger, assuming it is, because a lot of times that's that's what's going on LinkedIn. Um, there's a couple ways you could approach it. I'm a huge fan of interacting in comments first, especially with people that are active. Now, let's be honest, most people sitting on LinkedIn are not going to be active. So the next best method might be a direct message or even an email if you can get an email address. Um, Keep it simple, right? A paragraph worth of information is, in my opinion, the sweet spot. You do not need to write a novel. You do not need to convince them why you're awesome with a bunch of data and value in the initial conversation starter. Typically, what I try to recommend to folks that are connecting or reaching out through direct messages is somewhere between like 3 to 5 sentences, right? Let them know why you're reaching out, right? What's the purpose of the connection? Number one, try to come up with some sort of area of commonality, right? Establish commonality with them, whether it's you're in the position I want to be in, or you work at the company I want to work at, or we went to the same school, or you post a picture of kids and I do that too. It could be anything, but try to have some sort of a personal connection that's going to encourage them to respond and not just ignore the this creepy message that showed up. Try to get to a personal level and some sort of a commonality, and then of course you know uh, don't ask them for anything. I think that's another pretty big mistake that a lot of people make in cold calls or cold emails or cold direct messages is right off the bat, right, where they don't know you and they've never heard of you before, you're asking them for 15 minutes of their time. uh, that happens to me maybe 20 to 35 times a day. um, and I don't know these people, and my time is my most valuable thing, so be respectful of that, right? Just establish the connection first. Your objective with trying to start conversations with people that have valuable information should just be to start the conversation, right? You don't need to get a coffee chat. You don't need to have them do something for you. You don't need to ask for a referral from a total stranger that has no idea who you are or what you're about. Just start the conversation, whether that's through comments or an email or a direct message. Make it simple, get the conversation going, and you can kind of move into whatever space you need to once the transition or the transaction has started verbally.
Yeah, and I think those 15 minutes that you mentioned are key because a lot of times I say yes to people who say, "Hey, I want to learn a little bit about this or that," and they'll try and put a half an hour on my calendar, and I sort of say, "Hey, listen, 15 minutes would make this a lot more digestible for me. I have some other things going on, and also it'll allow me to do some other work in those 45 minutes." So really, keep in mind when you're sending those meeting requests that 15 minutes is like the sweet spot, and it's
Yeah.
easy for someone to say yes to that. But if you put a half hour, an hour, they're gonna sort of recoil and run away from you.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest with you. My default for anybody asking me for a half an hour's, and I've never ever interacted with them before, is just going to be no. Um,
Yeah,
15 minutes is way more palatable. Absolutely.
yeah. And we have questions here too that are very similar from Alfonso and Sapadia. And both want to know, how do you talk about your weaknesses? And especially if you're transitioning into a new field, you may have a bigger skills gap or something like that than maybe someone who's been in that career and been in that field for a while. So, how do you get that role? How do you talk about your weaknesses without sort of sabotaging yourself?
Wonderful question. I'll give you a couple different takes. So again, I've been a hiring manager for 10 years. I don't use the "what are your weaknesses" question when I interview most of the time, but definitely familiar with it. It's kind of an industry standard in many cases. So um, yeah, I would say approaching the "what are your weaknesses" question, or the topic of weaknesses, doesn't really change too much, if you're changing jobs in industry versus moving to a new industry. I'd say first and foremost, you want to show the hiring audience or whoever's asking that question that you're self-aware, right? That you understand what an actual weakness is. Do not take the Michael Scott approach and answer with weaknesses that are actually strengths. It's ridiculous, and it doesn't really help me as a hiring manager or hiring audience learn about you. Maybe a little bit, but not as much as I think is an actual authentic answer would do. I would say again, your goal is not to not have weaknesses. Your goal is to show that you're aware of them, right? And that you've got some sort of an action plan in place to address them. Everybody has weaknesses. I've got tons and tons of weaknesses. I think a good answer to that question is, again, being self aware, vocally self critical, sharing what you believe that weakness is, building trust with the audience in the process of like, oh, hey, this person can actually talk about stuff that they need to get better at. That's cool. Um, and then, yeah, you always finish that question or finish that answer off with, and by the way, like, here are the specific things I'm doing to to improve on that weakness or to get around that weakness, depending on what it is. I would say that, again, to the point of the question, this isn't usually a question I would say spend a ton of time on, right? Give your authentic answer, talk about how you're making improvements, and move on. I think to Andrew's point, right? Like, you don't want to turn on this question for 5 to 10 minutes. It's not a topic that you need to do that, right? If you're in an interview or in a phone screen or something like that, you want to spend more time focusing on the positive and what you're really good at, as opposed to the weaknesses. But again, don't skip it. Don't give a fake answer. Be authentic, build some trust with the hiring audience, and then make sure they know the actions or the steps you're taking to make improvements.
I completely agree. Have that answer ready, because usually, it will likely come at some point. But don't, like you said, don't have the Michael Scott answer where it's just like, my weakness is that I work too hard,
Right.
because everyone will see through that. You want an actual answer, and what I usually say is, listen, you say your weakness and you actually talk about the steps you're taking to address that weakness, which usually shows that you're working on self development, things like that, and that also puts a positive spin on it. And we have a question here from Jason, and Jason wants to know what your ideas are regarding contract work. And I think in transitions, contract work can actually be really valuable, right?
Yeah. Good question. So I'll be honest again here and say that, if you had asked me this question maybe 5 or 10 years ago, I probably would have had slightly different opinions and maybe slightly different answers. But post COVID, where the economy did weird things and the job market did weird things and people moved all the time and hiring got crazy and still to some degree is pretty topsy turvy. I'd say that, the impression of freelance work or contract work has really changed. The gig economy to some degree is so much more legitimate than it used to be. So, would I hesitate to talk about contract work, in between jobs or even as like a side hustle? I would say that you can gauge the audience, right? Sometimes that's a great question for the recruiter that you're working with prior to an interview or prior to a phone screen. But I would give you my opinion that like 9 times out of 10, talking about contract work, especially, is totally on the table, totally legitimate information that I, as a hiring, audience member, would want, as long, again, as the skills are relevant, the results are relevant, your performance is relevant. Assuming it is, share it. We absolutely want to know that info, and likely it's going to be recent, which makes it even more informational. So, freelance work, again, I would say, it's not a formal contract. It depends on what the freelance work is. If it's relevant and it builds your case, you can make the decision on that. But I would say it's not worth, I wouldn't hide it, right? It might not be at the tip top of my resume, depending on what else is there, but I wouldn't hide it. Freelance work, again, if it's in the right space and is allowing you to learn and grow in the right things that I'm interested in, things that qualify you for my job, tell me about it. Absolutely. Especially if you've got strong, ROI or results delivered, in a project or a task or an assignment that help, again, make you stand out as a strong candidate. I wouldn't hesitate to share most of that information. Student projects, I don't know if that qualifies as a contract work, but I'd say maybe that's the one spot where I critique just a little bit. But that's probably another question for another day. Just be careful with what you're sharing. Um, like you
Yeah, and
mentioned
also it
there.
depends on how far away from that student
Right.
project you are.
Right. I mean, again, in all honesty, I would say a common mistake is that I'll have people come in that are like 5 to 10 years experience, and they think like, hey, I'm in this industry. I've been doing this work for let's say 5 years, right? And I want a career transition to a new industry. I don't have any experience there, but oh, hey, Adam, by the way, I did these school projects 5 years ago that are kind of similar. Should I put those in my resume? Should those be the first things I talk about? No. Most of the time, no. Um, but yeah, again, maybe in some extreme cases, but I think that can sometimes be a tripping wire for folks on the in that transition area, right? Where there's like, I don't have any experience and I need something. I'm just going to throw this random student project that I was a part of 7 years ago at a university, and talk about that. Yeah, be
Yeah,
careful for
yeah.
that stuff.
And we have a question here from Coyote, who I think has a really fantastic question when it comes to career transitions. And if you have a target employer in mind, and maybe you say, hey, listen, this is sort of my dream employer, I would really love to work there. If you're interested in working there, should you apply maybe for a position you're overqualified for, if that is your best entry into that company? What is sort of the equation someone should sort of think of when they're thinking about that?
Excellent question. For me, it goes back to that life wheel, right? If a step down in title or even a step down in compensation at the right company gives you the freedom in that environment space or that passion space, then it might actually be worth it, right? I don't think as a career coach I can paint, with with a brush, the only answer to this question. It fully depends on what your lifestyle goals and your career goals are. But I would just encourage you that this happens all the time, right? All the time, where I've worked with executives or directors coming from the construction industry or from the lumber industry, and they've said, I really want to get into tech, or I want to get into engineering, I want to do these things, but my executive experience doesn't necessarily transfer at the same level. That's okay, right? Again, if it's a situation where it's creating the right work environment for them, lining them up for better longer term career opportunities or better compensation, maybe 5 or 10 years down the road, then it might absolutely be worth it, for them to do something like that or consider something like that. But in my opinion, if it's a dream company, um, and we're talking about relatively minor title changes or relatively minor compensation changes, I would say go for it, right? Because once you're in, usually the hard part is getting into the firm. If they're larger companies with more job openings and more people, then typically moving around is not all that hard. And again, promoting and finding the right fit and right role for you is just part of that, first couple year or two process, and that's where all the fun is. So yeah, if it's a place you really want to work and you're excited about it and it gives you the kind of lifestyle you want, I would say go for it. Titles, in my opinion, thanks to LinkedIn, are they don't mean as much as they used to once you're outside of the company. So I wouldn't worry too much about that.
And we have a few questions here about sort of recent graduates, and I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with because of sunk
Mm.
costs. You sort of go to school maybe for communications, you go to school for political science, and you've invested all this money, so you sort of say, okay, I have to go into this field. But maybe you get into the actual real world and the actual real experience, and you say, I'm not feeling it. So for people who are relatively new to the workforce, what's your advice for them to transition? Should they follow the same steps, or, when they don't have maybe a lot of real world experience behind them, what's your suggestion?
Yeah, well, I mean, I would offer my condolences first and foremost. It's never a fun situation to feel like you wasted money on an education. But I would encourage the folks that feel that way that you probably didn't. Um, Again, a million things can happen over the span of a career, right? You can come back and forth and up and down and left and right. It doesn't always move in that diagonal line. Don't believe the hype. Um, your degree says a lot, whether it's an associate degree, a certificate, or a bachelor's or a master's or whatever the heck it is. It, you know, Whatever that title says on that piece of paper is probably less important than the fact that you've learned how to learn, that you've learned how to work with people. Um, Getting a degree says a lot of things about you. And even if you feel like you might have got it in the wrong space or you're not excited about the work you're doing, it's not a total loss. Now, is there some cost? Absolutely. Might you have to go get new education? Yeah, it depends on your goals. But yeah, the simple answer I would say is that, again, that transition process of identifying the kind of lifestyle you want, framing up those four criteria of strengths, environments, passions, and compensation, that whole exercise still applies. It's where you get to the question of what are the gaps, right, and how complicated of a transitional plan am I willing to get into. For people that are recently out of school, recently have a degree, um, I guess I would say I would encourage you not to panic too fast, right? You just finished school, you just kind of launched into a career. A lot has changed. Give yourself some time, right? You don't need to make decisions in the span of weeks or months. I would encourage people to say, you know, take the time to build a really strong career transition plan and do the research and figure out, you know, what's the best way for me to overlap between the degree I have and the role I'm currently in or not in, right? And where I want to go. And maybe, you graduated with an arts degree and you want to be a software engineer. Uh, you know, the path to get there might be multiple jobs over multiple years, right? You don't have to just abandon everything that you went to school for the last 3 or 4 years, in a really short amount of time and say I got to go back to boot camp. I would say that there's lots of ways that you can make that transition more gradual, right? Find the right companies, find the right, firms that are going to allow you to get there eventually, but you might not have to go, straight to SDE or straight to whatever that title is. You can probably say, okay, well, much easier transition would be from the CSM role to, let's say, like an analyst role, and then from an analyst to like a program role, and then from a
Mhm.
program to a technical program, and then from technical program to SDE. There's, again, bazillions of ways you could do it, but I'd say don't panic too fast.
Yeah, and I always like to remind people that they're baskets of skills. So even
Mhm.
though you maybe have, graduated and you have a degree in political science or you have a degree in math, it doesn't mean that you can't do other things with the skills that you learned. It was just sort of packaged up in that degree. But you probably took general ed courses, you took other courses, maybe you had a minor. And then, even if you're an accountant, you've already been in the workforce, you may be an accountant, but you also have other skills because you just use them in the service of accounting. So you could always break those down and say, okay, well, I could do these small individual things. And, that's something that also applies to the career that I want to transition into. So I always try and
Mm.
tell people, forget sort of the packaging and look at the inner workings of all those bits and pieces, and realize that you're not starting from scratch.
I love that.
And
Yeah, that's good.
yeah, and we have a question here from Arceli that is really interesting. And basically, if you're working on a career transition and you go through the activities that you suggested, you've reworked your resume, but you're not getting traction, what should you do? Because I think that that's a spot that a lot of people sometimes feel themselves in.
I'd say this is probably about a third of the people that come to us is folks that are actually in career transition themselves and are feeling stuck. Um, so, first and foremost, it's common, right? Don't panic. Um, I would say just kind of some general rules of thumb, right? I'm a big fan of trying to figure it out for yourself. I'm not the person that's probably going to pick up, the phone and call a coach immediately once something goes wrong. I'm going to experiment a little bit, and I would encourage people to do the same, right? Don't give up on yourself in the first week of not hearing back anything on your resume or not getting those networking returns or not hearing back on applications. But at the same time, if you've experimented and you've tried different approaches and you've, done research on your own and you've, again, listened to talks like this on LinkedIn and those methods aren't applying, I would also encourage you, don't be the person that applies to 300 jobs in 3 months and gets nothing, right? I would say draw a line for yourself maybe before you make the decision to reach out for help of, this is the point I'm going to reach. But yeah, get help, right? And help doesn't have to be paid professional coaching help, right? It can be, go talk to people again that are in the roles that you want to be in, or find family members, find friends, find people that have managers, or interview people, and try to leverage the network you already have to get some feedback, right? What is my resume missing? What is my LinkedIn profile missing? If you're still not getting any results or you're not getting the right feedback from that crowd, right? Go to the industry crowd. Start to meet strangers on LinkedIn. Start sending those direct messages. Start looking for feedback from that avenue. If that's not working, then again, your last option might be paid professional coaching. Get somebody that's got the experience to dive into that resume or that LinkedIn profile or whatever networking approach you're taking, and give you feedback from that perspective. um, in many cases, it's the problems that I generally run into are very specific, right? I wouldn't necessarily say there's these common themes. Sometimes there are, but it often depends on kind of the type of transition that's being attempted, where somebody's just trying to bite off way too much, right? I'd say another common scenario is we get people with 10 to 15 years of experience that are coming from an outside organization or an outside industry that don't know how to level themselves, right? So again, that example I talked about, where I've got a director of, let's say, construction management that has no idea where they would, fit in level wise at a company like Meta or Netflix, or pick a company. It's stuff like that we see a lot. But yeah, don't struggle too long on your own. Do your best to try and learn it for yourself, but draw that line and then go get help once you kind of reach that point. And there's a spectrum of people out there that can help, right? There's tons of free resources, there's tons of paid resources. You can decide how quickly you want to move through them, right? If time is of the essence, maybe you need to pay for something up front just to kind of learn what you don't know and save yourself some time. But again, you get to make that call.
Yeah, such good advice. And then my next question is actually for those of you watching. I would love to hear your feedback on today's event and also your ideas for what can come next. So, our producer is going to be putting up a slide in just a second with a link. So, you can see it there at the bottom, lnkd.in/C21, or you could scan the QR code with your phone and it'll open a survey. And like I said, I would love to hear what you thought of today's event, what other topics you'd like help with, because that's why we do these programs. And we really want to hear, what you need help with. And that's how we decide what's coming up and what experts to invite on. So go to that link, scan that QR code, and tell us all about it. I think our producers will also be dropping the link into the comments. You could copy and paste that into a browser window, and just remember that if you miss any part of today's discussion, it's recorded. So once we're done broadcasting, you could hit the refresh button and watch it all again and get all of Adam's wonderful tips. And speaking of Adam, thank you so much for joining us. Can you tell us a little bit about where other people can find you after today's broadcast?
Yeah, it was a pleasure being on as always. I love talking with Andrew and just kind of fielding questions. It's great to hear from everybody. Easiest way to find me is my LinkedIn profile. Broda Coaching is a small career transitions firm. We only work with a couple of people at one time, but if you want to talk, you can go to our website. It's listed here, and set up a 15-minute chat, not a 30-minute, but a 15-minute chat, and that's totally free. Happy to work with you and learn more about what you're looking for. But yeah, either of those mechanisms, the profile on LinkedIn or my website, are great ways to get in touch with me.
Yeah, and also if people follow you on LinkedIn, they're getting sort of free advice from you
Sure.
without that 15-minute conversation. So hopefully people will give you a follow and check out your website. But thank you so much, Adam. I really appreciate your time and expertise.
Yeah, absolutely. Always a pleasure, Andrew. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone out there watching. It's been so wonderful spending this time with you. Please remember to take care of yourself. You could only get hired, you could only be a good candidate if you're healthy and well enough to do so. So be careful out there. And until next time, stay well and best of luck.